As you know, there he is. R.J. Hauman, Federation for American Immigration Reform. R.J., good morning to you, sir. How is it, and how's Washington, D.C.?
Well, it snowed this weekend, but it's still the swamp, but we're getting into spring.
Yeah. Are the cherry blossoms out yet, or they're a little early for that?
No, I think we're about 1 week out for them, but obviously this may be the first year where we can have some tourists finally come back after 2 years of everything pretty much shut down.
The ones that really want to come back, but you're absolutely right. It's been a weird time in Washington, D.C. In Joe Biden's first year in office, there were over 2 million illegal aliens. 2 million illegal aliens from dozens of countries around the world. We probably know less about these people in this 1 year than we've ever, even probably during the Obama administration. DHS Secretary Mayorkas immediately opened up the U.S. southern border after they came into office. And Biden set another record. Only 59,011 illegals were deported in the first year of office. But R.J., he has this audacious way of just saying something and forcing you to believe it. Like, for instance, we're pumping more oil now than we ever had. And I don't know why people do this, but they are. He looks at them and he talks. Most of the Democrats do this. But your thoughts on where we are now as far as in relation to what's going to happen with the Ukrainians?
Yeah, well, the marquee example of what you're saying is Biden's State of the Union, where he, called for amnesty for every single illegal alien in the country, but also called for some window dressing border security, talked about more technology and everything like that. But listen, this border crisis is entirely his fault. If you look at that data that you just mentioned, that ICE deported only 59,011 illegal aliens and made only 78,000 immigration arrests last fiscal year. And again, for listeners, keep in mind the fiscal year kind of ran into the Trump administration too. So under President Trump, he deported half of those 59,000 illegal aliens. And then it all plummeted right in early February when Biden issued all these executive orders to limit immigration enforcement. But I mean, to circle back to the actual crisis and the border itself, there were 2 million encounters in the last fiscal year. But if you look at the current data in this fiscal year, the numbers themselves, the encounters are high, but they're saying there's 220,000 known gotaways. So they know that people got away that they didn't apprehend since October 1st. But if you compare to last fiscal year, so October through January, and keep in mind, the Biden administration keeps those numbers close. They haven't even released the February numbers yet. But October through January of fiscal year 21, there was only 296,000 encounters. At that same point right now, 672,000. That's up 126% over the last record-setting year. And again, it's going to get worse. The one thing that they have in place that President Trump put out there called Title 42, which is a public health CDC rule that allows migrants to be quickly deported. The Biden administration is already saying that they're probably going to get rid of it come April. We'll have nothing left. That's why Mayorkas is going down to Mexico this week, basically telling him there's going to be another crisis and we can't stop it. But they can. They just don't want to.
What was, and I just read this briefly, and I didn't print it out because I was going to go back to it a little bit later on, but he had called for a powwow of other nations to find ways to improve the border. Nothing about actually completing the wall or the patrol in that area. Just he's going to meet with other countries. Do you have a follow-up on that?
Well, it's the most absurd thing. It's what they've been saying from the get-go, with Kamala Harris almost becoming the border czar, where she's going to go down and to find the root causes of migration. And Mayorkas is saying that same kind of thing this week. Listen, the root cause of migration are our magnetic pull factors that they've triggered. It's the policies they've put in place, and then the very, effective policies that they rescinded simply because President Trump's name is attached to it. There is a plan out there. We know how to address the border and stop this crisis and make sure the laws are actually enforced. Again, they just don't want to do it. It is in their agenda. They want more illegal aliens to come here to keep permanent political control of the country, all under the guise of charity. The crisis that they've triggered makes people less safe, exposes them to smugglers and human traffickers. They don't have their best interests in mind. It's only themselves.
I think you guys did some study on this, too, that a growing number, maybe a majority now, of Hispanic Americans living in this country, specifically in the southern part of this country, they don't like it either. They want this stopped.
Yeah, no, 100%. The Democrats couldn't be misreading that even more. Hispanics want more border security. They don't want to be referred to as Latinx. There's so many other issues. They're just taking them for granted in their support. And yeah, Wall Street Journal just put out an actual poll of Republicans are actually, I think they're like about 9% ahead with Hispanics. With African Americans, they're up about 20% as well. Listen, Democrats, they're so just catering, to their city, white collar base that they're forgetting what a lot of these people value. And again, Hispanics, they're not all in favor of amnesty. If you look back at what the GOP tried to do after Mitt Romney lost in 2012, was their famous thing called the autopsy, where they basically said, if this party ever wants to get Hispanic votes again, or even ever win the presidency again, we need to do amnesty for every illegal alien in the country. That's done. And I think the party and party leadership should ignore every single consultant or leader that tried to get the party down that path, because it's clearly not true. They value the sanctity of the American family, national sovereignty, and they want our borders secure.
Well, but that raises a weird question here, is how blindsided are these people, or how inculcated are they, or indoctrinated, because they're counting on their base, and their base is eroding slowly but surely. If they look at the stats and maybe read your numbers or anybody else's, the official numbers, and they see, wait a minute, we're losing Hispanic Americans, and we're losing maybe some independents from bringing them in here, but we're going to placate a small group of left liberals. And they're smarter than that. There's got to be something else going on, or these people are as nuts as Joe Biden.
I agree. There's a minority in the party of actual, talking heads and analysts who are trying to send a warning signal to a lot of these people, a lot of these candidates, the consultants that advise them, again, that you're in your bubble, get out of it. But I'm telling you, we don't see that up here in Washington. The Democratic Party, the largest border crisis in American history, could not get them to pivot away for amnesty for all illegal aliens with no strings attached. I'm telling you, there is not a single Democrat that supports actually securing the border. I mean, Congress just provided $14 billion to secure foreign borders, not ours. I mean, they were not only pumping money to Ukraine to help their sovereignty, which is essentially border security, but they were giving money to Lebanon, Egypt, Tunisia. But all the stuff that we needed to truly address the crisis at our border, they don't want to do it, and they never will. And maybe that's why this big election in November 2022, where we may see the biggest wave ever, may finally get them to rethink their radical stance.
I believe I saw some new data on that. It doesn't look good. Some internal data that was coming across as far as the GOP's chances coming up in the midterms, and they certainly haven't worsened. In many cases, they've increased. R.J. Hauman, am I pronouncing the last name right, R.J.?
You got it right. You got it right.
Is that close enough? Oh, good enough.
It's close.
Director of Government Affairs, Director of Government Relations and Communication. I got a couple of other questions, and if you haven't heard this, there are two things that I want to mention on the passing here before we get to the next segment. Mayorkas has made some new directives, and I don't know if you've seen this, but his new directives are not on the border, but it's new guidelines on extremist behavior. And that extremist behavior includes, I'll tell you about that, you would not believe this. And also, a new edict went out. All U.S. Army personnel will be forced to undergo mandatory gender dysphoria by September 30th of this year, according to a report in the news. We are on the basis or precipice of World War III, and this is what they're worried. Here, Nancy Pelosi over the weekend. The Ukrainian president is on the run. He's hiding out from here and there, and there's a trained squad of professional hitmen after him. And they connected with Nancy Pelosi in an interview, and here's what she said.
Putin's tax, that's really Putin's gas hike.
That's not it. That was the other one. Here is all right, what happened to it? Is it 4 or 5? I'm not sure. But here's what she said on the spin, as far as the spin on gasoline. Nancy Pelosi.
Putin's tax, that's really Putin's gas hike. That's his gas hike. So much of this increase in the gas tax, gas price started weeks leading up to what happened there.
And that was it. Nancy Pelosi, who has said she's running again. By the way, You realize she's 82 years old? Well, she'll almost be. She'll 82 on March the 26th. 82 years old. She has made tens of millions of dollars from that office. She has, in one way or the other, corrupted everything from immigration to abortion to the financial markets. She's had a direct hand into turning a beautiful state and its major cities in California, specifically San Francisco, into a hometown or homeless haven where a lot of today's tourists, they just don't go there anymore. Fewer and fewer. They go home with human feces and spit on their shoes from a downtown shopping experience. And from what it was, if you haven't been there in 10 or 15 years, you will probably swear that you'll never go back again. Let me get back to R.J. Hauman, Director of Government Relations and Communications. I don't know if the meter ran out or what, but I'm glad to have you back, sir. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I was going to mention this as far as Mayorkas is concerned. The new guidelines on extremist behavior include those who question the fraud of 2020 election and anyone who questions the regime's talking points on COVID and the treatments, including the mandates. This is true. I mean, this sounds a little bit like Trudeau in Canada, does it not, RJ?
No, it absolutely does. And this is just another example of Alejandro Mayorkas pretty much being the most dangerous cabinet member for President Biden. And we've called, just even outside the immigration space, the guy is absolutely radical. And we're afraid as an organization, that they try to call us a hate group and everything simply because we want to secure the borders. If you look at this, memorandum that was put out, it is so broadly written and it scares groups like us. And it should scare everybody that is kind of aligned with the right, that they could be under attack down the line. And we always think back, I know this is outside DHS, but under the Obama administration, the head of the IRS at the time, Lois Lerner, was going after the tax-exempt status of 501c3 of a lot of political organizations that they disagreed with. So, this is a warning signal that should scare everybody. And, we're hopeful, again, this pivots to why the election is so important, is the Republican Party, if they take back one or both chambers of Congress, they'll have control over funding these agencies, and they'll need to attach strings to a lot of the money that, hey, the money we give DHS, not a single dime can go to going after people around this country that you disagree with. All the money has to go for the very purpose of why DHS was founded after 9/11, which is to keep the public safe and keep our borders secure.
And a lame duck president for 2 years is basically neutered, to the most part, from what he can do. Right. And if that ever was needed, it is now, that we'd have to go 4 years with this guy in total power. But the thing that I'm looking forward to is going to be payback, and much needed, especially on the thing that we just mentioned as far as the January siege, because the real story has not been told. And we will have the investigatory power now as chairman of those chairs of those committee. What do you think? That's going to play into it, and it's going to be an active 2 years.
No, you're right, absolutely. But this is one of those things, though, too, is the Republican Party will have a firm mandate. And I understand to some extent, for example, why Mitch McConnell is wanting to just say, hey, we don't want to completely say what we want to do to, potentially give Democrats some political ammo that they could, misrepresent out on the campaign trail. I get why they want to make it a complete referendum on the Biden administration and Democrats in Congress, how extreme they are, critical race theory, a crisis at the border, COVID restrictions. There's so many examples, but Republicans have to come in and do the opposite. Okay. They can't just say, all right, we're not Democrats. Let's go back to just deregulation and giveaways for corporations. That time has passed. The American people are going to be looking at them and say, hey, you have to do the exact opposite, and also a little bit of payback. And I'm not saying that, to do negative things or things that are illegal or anything, but actually go after the people that went after them. That's the right thing to do. We need aggressive oversight and not giving them a blank check to, run the country as they see fit.
I think they would have their hands full on the fraud that's been committed. We've talked about the mask or the test. That was the latest, that they just spent literally billions of dollars. My understanding is most of those are still in a warehouse somewhere. We ordered the test just for the heck of it, and I relate this story. It was in Chinese when we got it in there. Other than U.S. Post Office, it was all Chinese language. And he says, buy American 2 days later. It's amazing.
It's just it's sheer hypocrisy. And that's, one thing back to kind of pivot that to the immigration kind of thing is, if you look back at that State of the Union speech, which I think he got like a 1-point bump in the polls, but I think now everybody's realizing when you go pay $7 or $8 to fill up your car, you don't approve of Joe Biden. But, he was focusing on the Buy American but not Hire American. Again, he wants to flood this country with people here illegally. And then he even made a comment, towards the end of his immigration remarks where he said, we need more guest workers to come into the country to do jobs Americans won't do. No, to do jobs Americans won't do for very low wages. So again, Biden doesn't want to hire American. He doesn't even really truly want to buy American. It's all hypocrisy. The White House is run by a bunch of, very white collar, elitist, leftists who are so out of touch with what the American people are going through. And I'm telling you, on the COVID front, that's interesting here in Washington. Everybody is still wearing masks, probably 90%. I think in 5 to 10 years, everybody will still be wearing masks as well, like we're in Asia after SARS.
Yeah. I will say this. You talk about elitist. This soundbite here, it's a quick soundbite, but I think this hits home to what you've just said.
Never forget what we've accomplished together so far. And by the way, the American people just trying to stay above water don't understand this. You tell them what the American Recovery Act was, they look at you like, what are you talking about?
It's a slap in the face. But you speak of elitists. That's it right there.
I mean, that's a shining example of, again, all these people in Washington, the policymakers, the talking heads and everything. That's how they think. It's absolutely ridiculous. And when they try to show things, I mean, again, for example, they had 30 TikTok stars or whatever come to the White House to discuss Ukraine and the policies over there. It's just, again, it's so out of touch. And I'm hoping, again, that the Republicans can provide a stark contrast to this. Because, my family out in the country as well, I'm up here in Washington, and some of this stuff, I tell them of things I see, their heads explode about it. I mean, it's just, it's absolutely ridiculous. And again, that's why this election is a referendum on so many things. And, my issue is just a slice of that pie. Again, there's so many things. And I think the results are going to be as extreme as we've ever seen before. A wave election that is unprecedented.
Somebody told me recently, and we were just talking about Nancy Pelosi and how she's ruined that city and that state, or helped it. But several weeks ago said, look, if you were on The Price is Right and you won a trip for two to San Francisco, ask them what the cash value in, take half of it, but don't go. You'll certainly be disappointed because that city has gone to pot. I do want to ask you this before we have to let you go, is what about the Ukrainians? How is this going to figure in? And again, they're classified not as refugees, so that takes on a little bit different import. Your thoughts on that, RJ?
Yeah, no, there's some real important thoughts here. Again, this is a crisis that is brewing, but it's a shining example of why regional resettlement's important. Let me kind of just share a couple things. I mean, I think it's about over 2 million people have fled the country, but they're going to countries right next door. That is how refugee resettlement works. If the United States truly wants to help them, help fund neighboring nations such as Poland and Romania, keep them close by the border. So when the dust settles, they can return to their country, not come here. And then second, it's ridiculous to see the left, try to equate what's happening in Ukraine with that refugee crisis of people coming from Syria and other countries up to Europe in 2015. Everybody fleeing Ukraine is a genuine refugee. It's women and children. Men are even going back into the country to fight. Everybody coming up from the Middle East back in 2015, 2016 was a single adult male, and that's dangerous, and that's not refugee
hold on
resettlement.
1 second. We have I'll get your final thoughts when we come back. Quick break. Back with R.J. Hauman next. Just thinking about it, as we get back to R.J. Hauman, we may be on the precipice of World War III, R.J., and our leader has an unbroken record of foreign affair failures, topped only by Afghanistan, which could be the biggest blunder in American history, other than maybe up there somewhere with Custard's debacle. And I don't know how that makes the American people feel, but I don't think that's going to go away with a 1% or 1 point bump that's now evaporated. Your final thoughts here on the closing segment, Bud, and you want to finish your thoughts on the Ukrainian people and that situation.
Yeah, I mean, again, just a general thought on the whole situation as a whole. I mean, it's hard for, the general public, policymakers in Washington, even people like me, to kind of wade through the muck and see what reports coming out of Ukraine are true. You have, two forms of state media of sorts. And again, it's hard to tell, And that kind of pivots in even to the immigration front to some extent. That's why it's hard to make policy decisions in general. But I think, again, one thing that is pretty clear is that there is a refugee flow out of the country, and rightfully so, again, over 2 million people. But again, the Biden administration needs to realize that the best way to help those people is in the region. Okay, you make sure that they can return. They don't have to flee. It's another kind of interesting thing that I've noticed too, and it started getting a ton of coverage, is that a Ukrainian family was turned away at the border. I think they came up through Mexico and they weren't let into the country. Now, keep in mind, those people are not refugees. And let me tell you why. They had to leave Ukraine, so they were already in another country. If you were a true refugee, the moment you leave that country, you want to stay where you are because you're safe. If you get on an airplane and then you go to Mexico, which essentially is another safe country, and you don't stay there, and then you come to the United States border, you are country shopping. That's not how the process is supposed to work. You are an economic migrant or just want to come to a new country. That's not refugee resettlement. The moment we allow people like that to come in, we encourage yet another crisis, a new flow like we saw with Haitians coming in. The two things we can do is you have temporary protected status, which Biden already did for those who are currently here, about 30,000, so they don't have to return. You suspend deportation flights. We're even fine with that. But again, you help people in the region. And I think that was a good thing we did in the recent government spending bills. A lot of the money that, again, went to Ukraine, helped humanitarian efforts within the region and regional resettlement. That's how we do it. Don't encourage a big flow of people here. Again, that doesn't help as many people. And it'll be yet another crisis that the Biden administration will trigger.
Well, we've seen this throughout history, whether it's Syria or in many other places too. Most people want to, if they got safe haven in a country next across the border, they want to set up some kind of camps there because their hope, their dreams, is to return when this is over, and whatever happens is going to be advantageous for them to do this. That's what the hope is once the bombing stops. Because they're landowners, many of them homeowners, business owners, and they want to go back home. So it only makes sense, and I agree with you 100%. Your final thoughts, sir?
No, again, just to reiterate, you're precisely right. But again, to kind of pivot back to a lot of these far left groups, aligned with the Democratic Party, everything in the country it's these non-governmental organizations. They're under the guise of being a charity and everything. They're encouraging people to leave where they are, to put everything down, to move to a place where the culture is different and everything, just so they can feel good. Okay, if you really truly want to help people, you help them in the region, and you make sure the conditions get better so they can return to their country with their families, those they love, and just again enrich the nation. Okay, so it isn't in a current situation.
I think one of the underplayed things here, and it aggravates the hell out of me, to be honest with you, but and you hear this on the coast, on the borders in Texas and Arizona and California from some of the media, of course, conservative talk shows and things, but the devastation that Joe Biden has caused in the amount of drugs coming through, things like fentanyl, and it's underplayed. It's not being reported. So for that one vote he hopes he's going to get, there have been a lot of people who've suffered from this, many who are dying, and that's underreported.
That's what we say though as well too. Every state is a border state, and you're seeing it especially in the Rust Belt and everything. We wish. The Biden, when you look at obviously the deaths of people 18 to 45, and you compare COVID to drug overdoses, there's more. So the Biden administration should pour the same kind of resources and money into making sure our border is secure so these drugs can't come up and take people far too soon.
And if anything, they're just getting more sophisticated in the way they camouflage those and more powerful, and that's not a good combination. R.J. Hauman, Director of Government Relations and Communications for FAIR, and FAIR is, if you want to go to the website, Federation for American Immigration Reform. R.J., thank you, sir. Appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you so much.
Sure.